The next speaker is from Corian Drago about changing realities.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about the online world Second Life and some of the things that residents have been doing in that space. Just to back up a little bit, most of the core code in Second Life I was involved with writing, so when this crashes, which it almost certainly will, it's probably my fault. Also, to give myself a little bit of an out, you're actually looking live right now at Second Life, which is, assuming I can drive the mouse correctly. So we're sitting in Second Life. This is Online World. We've been live for a couple of years. We're talking to a colo facility in San Francisco, not running locally. This is the first time anybody has seen our Linux client. We have up till now been, Linux client. We have been up till now just been Windows and Mac OS 10 on the client. So this is something that we're pretty excited about. I got the drop of this code in the airport at SFO before I flew over. I got this laptop the morning before I flew over. So if things burst into flames, cut me a tiny bit of slack. And if things really burst into flames, we'll fall back to a different laptop. But we are, in fact, sitting in a virtual world. We can look around. And because the only thing that's harder and more challenging than doing a live demo is to do a live demo when you do your slides in the virtual world at the same time. I figured I'd do that way. So we're also going to try to set a land speed record and get through about 100 slides in the next 40 minutes. So when I speak really, really fast, hopefully all of those of you who speak English better than I do will be able to follow. And thank goodness you're not making me do it in any other language, because as an American, I don't speak any other languages. So, all right, so hopefully here we will be able to get going. That would be a good time. There we go. All right, so we're going to start off with an assertion. And don't worry, I'm not going to read PowerPoint slides at you, but this one slide has a few words on it, and I'd like you to at least take a look at it. And what we're saying is that much as you've seen the transformation in the text space of the web and the democratization of text, that online worlds offer this same ability for amateurs to take over spaces formerly claimed by experts in a lot of different areas. And the corollary, of course, is that experts aren't going to handle this transition very well, because they never do. And the other one is that hacking, defined as the exploration of design space, is a beneficial form of user creation. So when we look at all the user creation that you're going to see over the next 40 minutes or so, keep in mind the people doing this are all just residents of Second Life. They're all people just using the system, playing around, trying to explore the design space and see what they can do. By the way, all these images that you're seeing are being streamed in from our colo in San Francisco using JPEG 2000 progressive streaming. That's why they kind of res in JPEG 2000, the best standard that nobody ever uses. So with those two assertions in mind, the other thing I'd like you to think about a little bit, think about the concepts of play versus work. And I don't actually know in Europe whether this is so strongly differentiated, but in the United States, thanks to the Protestant work ethic that the Northern Europeans exported to us, there's this profound distinction. You are either playing or you are working, and never the twain shall meet. And clearly that's a bad starting point, so keep that in mind. Also, be thinking about the concept of identity and community, something that seeing all of you here, it's clear that you guys understand this better than most people. So what we're going to do, we're going to do an overview, we're going to talk about user creation, and then we're going to hopefully talk about why this all matters to you. So what is Second Life? Second Life is a unique digital world. So by that, it's not a game. So if you've played or know about World of Warcraft, which the odds are at least many of you have, that's a game. We'll talk about where that came from, but it fits this definition of something called a MORPG, or a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. And there are a whole bunch of games out there. We'll talk about how many people are playing them, but Second Life isn't that. There's no leveling, there's sort of no forced path to take you through. It's a very different place. The other thing that's very important is everything you're going to see from within Second Life was created by and owned by the people who made it. So, and we'll look at sort of conventional EULAs and user licensing agreements where you tend to see comments like, you must grant rights to, and you may not, and do all those sorts of things. And Second Life doesn't work that way. If you've read Snow Crash, The metaverse is a decent analog to what we've tried to have created here. A better one is Vernor Vinge's True Names, The Otherverse, which is quite a bit older work and a short story that is well worth reading. And obviously, I'll talk about it as a digital world, online world, virtual world. People use a lot of different names for these places. Nobody's really settled on one that they like. Virtual has this negative connotation, so people have tried to move away from that. But the important thing is these are places. They're persistent. Lots of people are there, and people's action in those places matter, right? That's why persistence is important. It's as opposed to if you're in, say, playing a first-person shooter game where you may have a very interactive experience, but once you log out, your actions don't have any permanent impact on the space. So where these places come from, there's sort of 4 tendrils that came together to help us get to where we are today. You know, the first one, obviously, you guys know more about the history of the internet and ARPANET than I do. I do love this slide. This was so exciting. We're moving bits between 3 places. And obviously, where did that get to? Large-scale distributed creation by the participants and users of the space, right? There's been a couple mentions of Wikipedia over the last couple days, the last couple of years. Clearly, connecting people equals good. The one thing that's lacking on the web, and even in the so-called Web 2.0 space, is it still isn't a place. And by place, I mean something like this, something that plugs into our millions of years of evolution to understand place. If I'd asked you to think about where stuff is in your house, you could probably name hundreds or thousands of objects. If you mentally walked through your home, you'd remember all of these bits of information. If I asked you to remember where all the files on your desktop are, and not including like /etc, it's going to be a much more limited number. People don't remember flat file hierarchies and URLs very well. It's why we need search. It's why we need all these other things to help us. The other thing is, while Web 2.0 is becoming increasingly interactive, the interaction between people still tends to be very sequential. I post on my blog, I say something incredibly witty because it's my blog, and then somebody else posts and their post isn't nearly so witty because it's on my blog. There's no reason for us to ever agree. There's no actual true interaction going on there, as opposed to if we're having a conversation. There are all these extra cues that we have to know why we're trying to get somewhere, why we're trying to talk about something. And then obviously non-text creation is still pretty rare. Look at blogs versus podcasts, and now look at podcasts versus video podcasts. So second tendril is gaming. As soon as computers were hooked together, people were playing games on them because that's what people use computers for. So these 2 dashing Brits in 1980 said, let's take Dungeons & Dragons and put it on computers. And so that was Mud1. And Mud1 begat all of Morpigs, right? So the massive multiplayer online role-playing game sort of emerged in 1996. It's now really the dominant form. And the important characteristics to remember is that it has leveling. If you've played Dungeons & Dragons, Dungeons & Dragons is all about gaining experience points so that you can gain level and kill bigger and badder things. And Morpigs are the same way. You beat up on spiders, and then you can go beat up on rats, and 200 hours later you can beat up on dragons. And so the problem is this experience-based progression rewards things like hoarding and gives value to all the things that you're collecting, which of course creates, when you combine it with zillions of people playing, because of course if you want a growth curve, you want your growth curve to look like this. And this is actually now ludicrously out of date thanks to World of Warcraft. There are 5.5 million people worldwide just playing World of Warcraft. So it's somewhere around 12 million, 13 million people worldwide playing these games. And all these people want to move through the games faster, or at least a large enough percentage of them want to. So suddenly there's this big market in intangible goods. Right? So if you haven't experienced these games, you can get a sword, the +3 sword of smiting. And that sword might be very valuable to other people. So you go on eBay and say, I'll sell you my +3 sword of smiting, and other people will pay you US dollars or euros or real money for that item. Back when Star Wars Galaxy, which is another game, was going, characters that had become Jedi, which was this very rare thing in the Star Wars universe, were going for 1,000 US dollars. And even converted into euros, that's still some amount of real money. So people were using these shortcuts to move through design space faster. And the problem is, when you do that, is making all this content for games is really, really expensive. And of course, that's all being driven by Moore's Law, right? our machines are so much more powerful, we can make so much more stuff. When you look at sort of the content delivery, right? As you see the expansion of the CPU horsepower, suddenly we're shipping, multiple gigabytes on a DVD. Well, it takes time to make that stuff, and time is really expensive. So you look at the budgets of games, and you're now looking at budgets that look a lot like feature films in a very hit-driven market, and that gets kind of scary really fast. And of course, game companies known as bastions of efficient software development take a long time to make these games. I'm obviously being facetious. Game companies are sort of renowned for being very ineffective at doing software development, doing crunch mode and doing all the things you're not supposed to do. And you have to pay everybody while they're doing all this, and your content creation is now like 60% of your cost. So the game companies want you not to be able to shortcut your way through the game, so they set up lots of situations where you have information asymmetry, right? The game company knows the best path through the game, you don't. Well, as you guys all know, and as we learned in the search talk earlier today, lots of people working together can almost always fight their way through information asymmetry. So the big problem in games right now is that game creation costs are rising much faster than the market is growing. And I'm just a programmer and not a business guy, but that still seems really bad. So how they try to fight that is they fight that using copyright. And as we've seen in Europe as well as America, copyright's sort of expanding to take over all of the law, right? Copyright is the most powerful thing around, and so they're trying to use that to stop people from buying and selling and trading this stuff. So that's sort of the trap games have gotten into. So another path was VR virtual reality. You've got Evans and Sutherland in the 60s, which begat Autodesk and John Walker's amazing white paper in 1990. Where he sort of fused VR and computer-aided modeling, computer-aided design. And where we are today is, well, one, VR stuff's still just as geeky, which is kind of cool. And the second thing is we're almost being able to collaborate. The car up there is the ME412 that Daimler Chrysler did. And what's interesting is they went from an executive doodling on a laptop to a 200-mile-per-hour prototype in less than a year. And they did that by doing much of their crash testing, nearly all of their suspension design, everything else in a simulated space the whole way through. But it still wasn't collaborative. If I was working on suspension and the guy next door was working on, say, the hood design, and our two parts interfered, we had to wait till a nightly check. We'd both get a notice in the morning saying there's a conflict, and we'd have to go talk to each other to resolve this. Imagine how much better this would be if we could both just jump in the car and drive around the track and talk about this is why it's so big. And of course, the other problem in building cars is you're still getting into atoms, right? You're moving from bits, which work really well, and then you're moving into atoms, which basically suck. And I don't know what the European equivalent of Walmart is. Do you guys have big box stores moving through and taking things over? But in the US, Walmart's coming in and they basically are using economies of scale to displace small local businesses, right? And they can do this because they're dealing in atoms. The other thing you get is of course, traffic, which isn't good for any of us. The final tendril here is the idea of social spaces. And the most successful version of this was Randy Farmer and Chip Morningstar did this for Lucasfilm on the Amiga, if any of you remember that amazing platform. And this was around forever. This is Lucasfilm's Habitat. A lot of people played it, and there was no hacking, there was no swords. It was sort of this social space. And a more recent version of that was Active Worlds that also sort of saw a boom and bust during the late 90s. But one of the things we lost there was in text worlds like, say, LambdaMoo, and that's Pavel Curtis who made LambdaMoo when he was at Xerox PARC, users could actually make their worlds. And they could make interesting worlds and worlds that were cool enough that other people would want to come spend time in it. And so when you don't have that, these social spaces run into the same content crunch that games do. And then worse, they run into the problem that a lot of people come in and say, well, what do I do? Right? I understand that if you hand me a sword and there's a spider over there, I can go hack it. But I don't understand what I'm supposed to do if I'm just here with other people. So that was clearly a problem.